Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us once again for the Deep Dive podcast. Got some fun stuff doing Ron the Builder 2.0 today after his comments last week. Just immediately after we released the last podcast about the Kraken's build, not a rebuild, a build, came out and made some comments, and so we gotta revisit it and kind of redo everything that we had said last week to some point. So gonna be doing that today. Gonna be talking about some fun stuff, including those charity baskets from last week as well, because I think there's some fun things in there that we want to take a look at. We had a lot of fun kind of poking around. I think it'd be fun to do that with everybody. But first and foremost, RJ, we are recording this on Sunday, March 6th, so a day before everybody's going to hear it. And I bring that up because we did lose a member of the Kraken today. You had a great tweet about it earlier. I know you were just talking about us having some sort of tribute video, but we weren't able to quite get that done in time. I also don't think we needed all the Sarah McLachlan music you were suggesting. It's not like he died, but Austin Czarnik is no longer a member of the Kraken.
Yes, the man made his way back to the island, one of a rare few who lived to tell the tale of his encounter with the mighty Kraken. Austin Czarnik has returned to the New York Islanders. Well, actually, probably is it Bridgeport Sound Tigers still? They sent him down to the AHL. Yeah. But yeah, so Austin Czarnik back where the Kraken got him from, off waivers today. Yeah, sorry, no tribute video. We did not have the time. But you will be missed. I did enjoy him in his brief 6-game stint with the Kraken. I liked having a player that was kind of around my size on the team. That was pretty cool. And again, loved the hustle, loved the work ethic, but he just, was the odd man out.
Yeah, it is unfortunate because I thought he played really, really well while he was here. I enjoyed watching him out there. Like you said, the hustle, the effort level, all that stuff. I just thought he brought a little something during a losing streak, really, where the Kraken kind of needed it a lot. So unfortunate, but it is the business of sports, especially in hockey. And so it is what it is. Austin Czarnik gone, but not forgotten. See, now I'm on it too. See, it's again, he's not dead. He's not dead. All right. Baskets, RJ. Do you like auctioned off charity baskets?
I like them when they showcase someone's personality.
Well, that's good because that's what these sure did. The NHL Seattle Foundation website, they did a basket auction. I assume it was for the One Roof Foundation.
Yes, that's what it was for. Yeah.
Yeah.
It says on top of the page NHL Seattle Foundation, which looks a little sketchy, but
yeah, the website's kind of basic, but it's all good. It's all good. So we don't need to go through all of these, RJ. You and I kind of already did, but there was some stuff that we did want to touch on. Gosh, I don't even know where to begin. I guess one of the things we should get out of the way first, we'll get the negative thing out of the way before we start having fun. Only 2 baskets failed to meet their fair market value list price. Mm-hmm. That was Coach Hackstall's and Coach McFarland's.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've heard plenty about Hackstall from the fans this season. I think we kind of have an idea, of what the thoughts might be on him there. Mm-hmm. Also, McFarland runs the power play. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's probably pretty good reason there. The Hackstall one, especially kind of brutal, off by like $700. That's kind of rough. I will say all of these baskets ended up priced well out of my price range.
Oh yeah.
Could really, empty my bank account to get one of these, but it still wasn't a bad one. Hackstall's basket, as you go through it, got 4 low bowl tickets to the game against Vegas at Climate Pledge. That's pretty cool. The thing that gets me is the 3 Kraken Titleist Pro V1 golf balls. Now, RJ, you and I golf occasionally. You more than me. 3 golf balls gonna last you what, like 8 holes?
Yeah, I mean, for you, 1 or 2 holes, but yeah, it won't last you very long.
Yeah, so that one was a little weird. It's not like 3 boxes or 3 sets of 3.
Yeah, it'll last you till the first hole where there's any water.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, and the course at my house, man. That won't last anybody to get through 9 holes at this course. That's for sure.
Nope.
Let's see, some gift cards to some, wineries or restaurants, all that kind of stuff. The my favorite though is the box of Chipper's chocolate covered potato chips.
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't know was a thing, chocolate covered potato chips, but that's pretty cool. I wonder how good it is.
I think tried them once or twice. They are actually pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then
you're not going to mention the skim board?
Well, I was just going to say the big item was the skim board, the Marshmallow Thrasher skim board. I think that's where the fair market value of the basket went up a bunch. But I don't think people properly valued it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably where it kind of the discrepancy arose.
Yeah. Cheapest basket was from the other assistant coach, Coach Jay Leach. And I thought this one was a very good basket. I get why maybe it was the cheapest one, but I thought there was some really good stuff in here, starting us off with the $50 Home Depot gift card.
Hey, that's useful. Always gonna need something from there.
Yeah, I mean, he could have just made the whole thing just a big Home Depot gift card. I'm sure that would have been beneficial to some people. I know it would have been for me right now, as we're kind of redoing some stuff around my place. But that was cool. The thing that I really kind of questioned was the Moleskine Classic Collection softcover ruled notebook, because I don't know, in the day and age of smartphones and stuff, how many people still use notebooks like that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I always think of Bob Condor on the Kraken beat.
Yeah.
He's more of an old timer. He's got his little paper notebook writing down the notes, maybe hoping to get a bid from him. But yeah, I don't know how many people are using that.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure we have listeners that still like to do it, pen and paper style. There's still plenty of stuff I like to do analog, but I don't. The thing with me with notebooks my entire life, I always got them because I was like, oh, I'll use this for whatever, and then I just never did. Like, I have mountains.
Yeah, they just sit off in the corner.
Yeah,
and there's a bunch of them.
All my good ones, all the cheap like 5-cent ones I used all through college and school and everything. But any good notebook I ever had, I never felt like I had something worthy enough to put in it.
Yeah, that's conundrum.
It's a problem. And then plenty of coffee related stuff in there for Coach Leach. All right. Do you have like a favorite player basket, RJ, you want to talk about?
Ooh, there are some really good ones.
Well, here, should we talk about the most expensive one first and get that out of the way?
Is that Grubauer?
No, it was
No.
Donskoy.
Okay, let's talk about Donskoy, because I was saying Grubauer might be my favorite, but let's talk about Donskoy.
Yeah, Donskoy is by far, well, I guess not by far in a way the most expensive, but Grubauer and Donskoy is pretty above everybody else's. Donskoy's ended up going for $11,200, so very much above the $2,000 fair market value. The theme for this basket was "Happy Wife, Happy Life," and part of the basket includes
on that.
Yeah, no, and part of the basket includes literally a sign that says "Happy Wife, Happy Life." But I think the real thing that sent this basket, and I say basket very much loosely right now, because the thing that sent this basket, well over the fair market value, was the custom pair of Kraken designed skis.
Yeah, those look awesome. I mean, if you have a chance to check it out on the auction page, like, really cool design for those skis. I mean, if you're going skiing with those, you're gonna be the envy of everyone out there, on the slopes. Those are some pretty cool skis.
They are amazing. I'll try to put in a picture of them for the podcast for anybody looking on YouTube, watching us on YouTube. They were amazing, great design. I think worthy of sending this basket, up to the top of the leaderboard, so to speak.
Yep. And other little things to, happy wife, happy life. You got a gift certificate for a spa massage, a candle, Swarovski crystal bedazzled Kraken cap.
That's the one. It's something. It's maybe a little gaudy for me, but I'm a man of simple pleasures. Like chocolate covered potato chips.
Yes, there you go.
All right, so Grubauer, you're saying you think that one might be your favorite?
Yeah, I like the Grubauer one because, it's like kind of favorite things, and also he wants to give like a real fan experience, which is cool. It's got the lower bowl game tickets, and a parking pass, so he thought of that too. It's got a $200 Kraken Team Store gift card, so you can just go to this game and absolutely go nuts. Got a lot of different Kraken merch and stuff, but it also has a team signed inaugural season jersey. I mean, that's ultimate thing to have for a fan. There, you should frame that. Don't wear it to the games. Frame that. I mean, that'd be really cool. And then some dog things as well, and some kids things too.
Yeah, I was going to say, not only do you get the $200 Team Store gift card, but you've got, a kid's tee, a woman's tee, quarter zip for a man. You've got, in addition to the team signed inaugural season jersey, you've got a Kraken Grubauer jersey signed that you can wear to the game. And then just, tons and tons of fun Kraken related stuff. But yes, I think the parking pass is definitely something that needs to be mentioned, because I mean, that's got to be worth what, like $400 or $500?
Yeah, sure feels like it. Yeah, I don't know how everyone does it as far as finding parking for the game and everything. Very lucky I live close to the arena.
Yeah, and so that one also worth mentioning, 32 bids exactly. So very, very good.
Perfect.
Yeah,
you can't bid after that, right? I mean, you don't want to be the 33rd there and mess that up.
No. Now, my favorite basket was Jaden Schwartz, and that's because the theme of that basket was Dog's Day Out. So it, yes, it's got the Kraken signed jersey, all that kind of stuff. But then it's just, this is doggy heaven, man. Looking at this basket, you got a mermaid squeaky plush dog toy, the collapsible water dish, 3 Kong squeaker balls, which both dogs we've got here absolutely love, of varying sizes. One is only 5.5 pounds. And then it's just tons and tons of great stuff. You got a rib bone. You got a beef lung steak canine treat. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds amazing. 4 wild bones, elk, venison, ham, and rabbit. Like, there's just so much stuff in here. A big box of bio bags, so you can pick up after your dog after it, stuffs its face with all this other good stuff. Like, it's absolutely great. A small batch of freeze-dried beef hearts, like, oh my gosh, Afra would love this basket so much.
Yeah, no, it's certainly great for any dog lover there, and it really, again, shows kind of Schwartz's personality. You think he likes dogs?
Yeah, just a little, I'm guessing here. I think it's a shame only 9 bids on this one. I gotta think there's more pet lovers out there, dog lovers. Come on. And then the grooming gift card, but yeah, that one was my favorite. That being said, I will say, looking at the list of everything, Tanev's sure does stick out with that giant bag of Sour Patch Kids.
Yep, he's got the candy too. What, Swedish Fish also? A couple decks of playing cards.
Yep. Well,
this is such a brand attempt. And then my favorite from this, though, a DVD of Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd one that's just kind of thrown in with all this other stuff, but I mean, it's a great movie. Can't go against that.
Oh, Brandon Tanev, gotta love it.
Yeah, it is pretty funny.
Speaking of baskets with some interesting personality, how about Morgan Geekies?
Yeah, Morgan Geekies is very good. Obviously, not really a basket, because it's all put into this nice backpack from Lululemon. But yes, the Settlers of Catan game really stands out.
And the Times crossword book. It gives. I feel like you don't have a lot of NHL players that would include that in their basket. No. Not many. I mean, Morgan Geeky, he's so interesting. Man of many talents. I saw on Instagram he was playing the piano the other day. Just really interesting guy.
Yeah, and a big fan of leaving his younger brother out of stuff too. Based on if you look at it, the Instagram comments, Connor's always in there giving him grief. It's good. Got the bag of cheesies though to go with that. Again, 3 golf balls. it's all right. And then where was the other thing I was gonna mention? No, I think that was it. But yeah,
not the book.
Oh, well, the book is good. The subtle art of not giving an F by Mark Manson. That's another good book to go with your The Times crossword puzzle book.
An art that Geeky has absolutely mastered, by the way.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Clearly read that book quite a few times. No, for me, it's the left golf glove that would do you and me nothing, as we were both lefties.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
Would do us no good, unfortunately.
Yes, and I did see one person, and I'm going to say it, but I don't think that this is entirely fair. One person did point out on Twitter that I saw that the Jeremy Lauzon basket looks like it's in a little wastebasket.
Oh no. Oh no, I just
and some people were talking about that, and I was just like, not great. That being said, his basket not bad. I'd take that foam roller and the cribbage set.
Yep. Yeah, the cribbage set. How about that?
That's a good one for some surprises. But
I could certainly use the foam roller.
Yeah. So overall, there is some good stuff. They raised a ton of money for charity. That's really what's most important about all this stuff. But we thought we'd kind of go through some of them there. Don't want to go through all of them. We'd be here for the full hour, but it's still fun.
Yeah, and just a good window into the players' personalities too. It's so fun. It's like, I'd encourage you, if go on the website, go through all these baskets. There's some really interesting things that you're gonna find.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the YouTube description for the podcast, a link to take you to the page so you can check them all out. All right, so RJ, as we get into the deep dive section of this podcast, the builds 2.0, we're of course getting to this because, well, Ron Francis said some stuff. And
sure did.
Wasn't, in some ways it was good that he was made available to you all, the media, because we got some idea of what the future could look like, but it was not what we were expecting. So why don't you take us through the experience of getting Ron Francis, I believe for the first time, for media availability for you, and what that was like and what he said.
Yeah, so this was the first time that I was there for a Ron Francis media availability. The last one that was, in person, everything was day one of training camp, which is the day before I became media. So this was a really cool experience, and one that kind of came by surprise too. In the middle of practice, they came up to us and like, yeah, you're getting Ron Francis after practice. And so I think a lot of us just kind of scrapped the questions we had for Hackstall and the players, and we're like, okay, this is more important. So yeah, I mean, we got Ron Francis for a media availability on his birthday, no less. That was interesting as well. And, I did kind of, have made fun of him in the past as far as, his ability to say lots of things while saying nothing at all. But he actually did give us, some information, certainly more than I thought he would. So credit to Ron there for being, about as forthcoming as you can be as an NHL GM.
Yeah, no, there was some good stuff in there. Like I said, we got a glimpse into what this offseason is going to look like for the Kraken. And that's not something that I think we thought we'd get. We were kind of counting on hearing the same line we've been getting all along, which is 3 to 5 year window. We're just looking to build this thing up right, all that kind of stuff that he'd been saying all last offseason around the expansion draft through free agency into this season, the few times that he's, been interviewed this season. But instead, we got something very different.
Yeah, we did. And, the way that this was framed, too, is kind of him making himself available before the trade deadline. And so I figured that's probably what a lot of the conversation was going to be about. But he, was there for over 20 minutes, just kind of taking questions on all different sorts of things, which was cool to see. And as you mentioned, one of those was the off-season plans. I kind of want to do just a quick rundown of basically, what he talked about. As far as state of the team currently, he started out just like, it's obvious the way the season's gone, we're not going to make the playoffs. Yeah. So, you've got to make some trades. You got to do things like that at the trade deadline. Acknowledge that it hasn't been easy for the players, hasn't been easy for the coaches or the fans or anybody really. And, as far as general state of the team stuff, he also said that, he really wishes that COVID wasn't so prevalent this year, because he wanted to see the players kind of get out in the community and meet people and, build a lot of those bridges that way, and that they haven't had the chance to do that. As far as the trade deadline, he talked about identifying a core of players that you want to build around, and then kind of taking offers for the non-core pieces, which, that makes sense. That's kind of what teams do at the trade deadline. Now, he didn't rule out trading one of those core pieces, but he said it would take something substantial to get that done. He was asked, picks or prospects, what are you looking for as far as a return? Basically just said, well, it depends what the picks are and who the prospects are. But he's like, yeah, those are generally the two things that you're looking to get back when you're a seller.
Mm-hmm.
He said he's absolutely interested in being a third-party broker to sell cap space if teams are interested in that, whether that's, taking on a contract just for the remainder of this season, or whether it's retaining some money on players that are, getting flipped to another team. So the Kraken will be in the market to do something like that.
Yeah, really excited that he brought that up and mentioned that, because I know we've gotten questions about that, whether or not the Kraken are going to utilize their cap space that way. We've both had that question ourselves. It's something we've talked about in the past. We've wanted them to do, because it's it's a way of basically getting a free draft pick or something.
Exactly. It's a free asset. I mean, the only, trade-off is that, the owner has to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's actual money that comes out of the owner's pocket. But, he reiterated, the ownership group has been great. They've given us the green light to spend to the cap. So whatever you can do to get assets to help the team, they're absolutely willing to do financially. So that's a good sign. Good to have that strong ownership.
Yeah, free very much in quotes.
Yeah. Talk to the ownership. Like, it's not free to me.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of things that you should be willing to do if you own an NHL team, to help out, certainly with a salary cap. Now, as far as players that could leave at the trade deadline, we talked about the UFAs potentially, and he added he's had that conversation with Mark Giordano that had been reported previously. He's probably, this is me talking now. He's probably out. He's probably gone. But as far as the other players, he said he hasn't really had conversations with any of the other players at that point. I'm sure that's something that's coming, for some of the UFAs. And then I did, kind of follow up and ask him, like, how important is it to have an idea of how likely a UFA is to stay before making that decision to trade them or not, given that you're risking losing them for nothing. And, as a lot of answers, he said, it depends. It depends kind of what you think the money is going to be for a guy if you're not certain, and it depends on what teams are offering in return for that player. So no real clear direction on that one way or another for, like, say, a Calle Yarncroke. It's just going to depend what teams are offering for him, and if he thinks it's a good fit, how close he is to maybe wanting to stay. But he did add in general at the deadline, the position that we're in, we have to listen to everything. And I'm sure he will be listening to everything. No, very few moves are going to be off the table. You got to listen to everything at this point.
Yeah, you absolutely do. Given your situation, and given your situation with the amount of expiring contracts you have,
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's important that they have internally identified the core that they are happy with and that they want to move forward with, because then you can try to plan around that as best you can. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really, really interesting deadline, as we've been saying. We've been waiting for this for so long now. We've been talking about it so many times, and it's still a little ways away. But it's going to be really interesting, and I think we're going to have a much better picture of kind of what internally the Kraken feel about some of these guys, and how some of these players feel about, being in Seattle and being a member of the Kraken, right? I think that last quote kind of that you talked about gives us a good idea. If there is a UFA like a Calle Yarncroke and he doesn't get moved at the deadline, I don't necessarily think that would be because teams weren't interested in him. Certainly not, given how hot he's been. That tells me that there's probably some room there for them to work out a contract for him to stay in Seattle longer.
Exactly. If you see a guy like that doesn't get moved, I mean, that tells you something about maybe his desire to potentially stay, because I think that would obviously be a pretty big mistake just to hang on to a guy like that and lose him for nothing in the off season. So yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of get an indication of how the players really feel. Obviously, to the media and scrubs and everything, they're going to be, I love it here. It's great. You're going to say that. But when it really comes down to it, is deciding, are you going to stay or are you going to go somewhere else? There's a lot to consider there. And then the other area that Francis covered was prospects. real quick, which I think, was good to get some clarity on those guys. He said, obviously Matty Beniers, kind of the top prospect the Kraken are looking at. No conversations yet with him about, whether he's going to join the team this season. Pressed Francis a little bit further, and I said, well, okay, what are you leaning a certain way as far as what you would want given what's best for his development? And he said, kind of turned it into the whole burning a year of the ELC. Like, well, a player and their agent will probably want to burn the first year of the entry level contract. And so that's what they probably want to do. And then I think it was Andy Ide from Sound of Hockey just asked him straight up, like, okay, well, look, do you want to burn the ELC? Do you want him here? And he's like, well, no, I mean, obviously as a team, you don't want to burn the ELC. That's, what the team doesn't want. But that's kind of what you have to do in this business, of dealing with higher end prospects. So I would still expect Beniers to play this season for the Kraken.
That's what those answers kind of tell me. Like the fact that he immediately goes to, well, they're going to want this and this is what it's going to mean, is kind of like his way of softening it up for the fan base of like, okay, understand he's going to come in, but it's going to cost a year off of his contract. Like he's basically already pre-explaining it to everybody.
Exactly. And for these GM things, a lot of times you kind of have to read between the lines like that. There's certain things they'll say, and you could kind of tell what it means if you've heard enough of these. As far as other prospects, he said the draft class in general is tracking really well. He mentioned Ryan Winterton, who's doing really well in the OHL. He mentioned Ville Ottavainen. He mentioned a few other guys. But he seems happy with how the prospects are going. And then finally, kind of what we've all been waiting for, the off-season comments. He did kind of get into what the team's strategy might be this offseason. And I guess the biggest quote there is he said, our plan is simply to be aggressive again in free agency this summer. So that's huge. It's not something that we were really thinking was going to be the team's direction. Certainly not, in the podcast last week.
Yeah.
I figured it might be a longer term build, but Francis really didn't seem to be, hinting at that at all. And, another quote that kind of was lost in a different question, but it was at the very end of his answer was, I'm comfortable that we have the cap space and money to rectify this sooner. So, I mean, he was asked if he needed to kind of clear more cap space for what he wanted to do this offseason. And he said, no, I think we have enough. But, to rectify this sooner, I think that kind of hints at what he's going at. So finally, I think it was the last question in the presser. I just asked him, like, you had hinted at a 3 to 5 year timeline, longer timeline for competing. Have the results of this season changed what that timeline is? Have they made you rethink any of that at all? And he said, well, we approached this wanting to be competitive, from last season. I don't think we, necessarily, thought that this was going to be, a longer build. But the first thing he talked about was that I thought we were aggressive in free agency. You look at the first 72 hours of free agency last offseason, and, we signed a few key guys, and he's absolutely right in that. And he said, I think we want to look to do that again. So I think that gives you a real good indication of what he sees the team doing in free agency. Grubauer, that was a big splash that they made, and something that they didn't necessarily expect was going to be there, but they were aggressive is absolutely the right word for it. So I think, if what he's saying is to be believed, they're going to go out and do something like that again this offseason.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and we'll kind of get into that stuff now because, last week we talked about, okay, what if they stick to the 3 to 5 year plan for the build? What does that look like? What is some of the stuff that they kind of have to hit along the way, the kind of checkpoints? If you're going to try to make this team competitive right away through free agency next year, I mean, there's a whole different set of stuff to talk about when it comes to that, both as far as, okay, what kind of players should they be targeting? Just in general, we can talk about that first and then get more specific at looking at, ahead to this year's free agent class. But yeah, I mean, there's so much nuance when it comes to free agency, the types of contracts that you sign, the length, the term that you're giving players, obviously trying to fit it all under the salary cap. Team does have plenty of cap space. More is going to be available to them. Obviously, you have all those expiring deals. the big thing is you're going to have Mark Giordano's 6.75 coming off whenever you trade him. Now you're probably taking money back in that trade, potentially, even a kind of a bad expiring contract from somebody just to maybe up the price there. But it's most likely going to be money that's coming off the books at the end of this season. I don't see them taking on a bad contract that's got 3 years of term left or something.
Exactly. I think that full 6.75 is going to be off the books this offseason.
Yeah, so they're gonna be entering the offseason with well over $10 million in cap space, regardless of what happens. Now, obviously, you got to re-sign some guys that we know they're going to re-sign. Jerry McCann is going to be re-signed. We've all been thinking Morgan Geekie, Ryan Donato, going to be re-signed.
Yeah. And on the McCann front, by the way, I'll give you a quote. He said, "One way or the other, we'll get something done with him moving forward." So yeah, McCann's staying. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, the only question is going to be, is it going to be a bridge deal or is it going to be something long-term?
Right.
And I think that's probably going to be a discussion for another day. We've already kind of talked about it some last week. We'd love for it to be something long-term, given his age now, to lock him in.
Yeah, that was the one bit of that was the one bit of last week's podcast that actually remains relevant.
Yeah,
the McCann bridge deal doesn't change very much.
No,
or the deal. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess real quick though, because we talked about Cali, I want to go ahead and run through some of the other UFAs real quick and just kind of get our assessment, because like we both agree, if Jarnkrok's staying past the trade deadline, that means he's probably staying long term, because there's for sure a bunch of teams that would be interested in him. Do we think that that's going to be the same for Marcus Johansen, Riley Sheahan, and Colin Blackwell? Because they're not quite the same level of Jarnkrok as far as ability to help a contending team, and certainly not from a performance standpoint, productivity standpoint.
Right. I certainly wouldn't put them in the same category as Jarnkrok as far as, if they're staying, I think they're re-signing. Mm-hmm. I'd probably give it about a 50-50 chance for any of the three of them. It's hard to know what exactly the trade market is for guys like that. Jarnkrok, it's kind of obvious given his recent play. But a lot of those types of players, the Johansens, the Shehans, those can be kind of team situation and market dependent. And the other thing is, I think, as we saw, or as I think we saw during the expansion draft, we can't know for sure, but it seems like Ron Francis sometimes would rather just not make a deal at all if his price isn't met, rather than just taking something less than what he feels the player is worth.
Right.
And so I wonder how much we'll run into that at the trade deadline as well. And this isn't just a uniquely Ron Francis thing. We've even heard Brian Burke, legendary GM, talk about that he would have that policy of basically, if his price wasn't met, he's just not trading the guy, even if it means not getting a return, because then otherwise other GMs know that eventually you'll budge. Yeah. So we might see that, but I'd give it about a 50-50 shot on those players.
Yeah, you don't want to set that precedent. I agree. Marcus Johansen, he was kind of a late free agent signing for the Kraken, so obviously there wasn't a big market for him when all he was going to cost was, a 1-year contract this last offseason. Sheahan, he's bounced around from team to team year after year forever. Like, that's just kind of who he is. I love what he's done this year for the Kraken. My guess, though, is that there's going to be too many centers next year to probably hang on to him. And again, I don't know that there's going to be a team looking to trade for him. This exercise was largely just so if anybody had the question, well, what about the other guys besides Jarnkrok? The one that's going to be interesting is Colin Blackwell, because we're seeing it now. He's starting to heat up. He's finally healthy. He's finally feeling it. It looks like he's finally gotten into a groove, into his rhythm, and we're seeing how good he can be. The only question is, I don't know what kind of trade value he'll have given how hurt he was this year. You know what I mean? The limited viewing opportunities that other teams had. And then in between all those injuries, there were certainly stretches where he wasn't himself. So I don't know what his value is.
Yeah, if you take the season as a whole, I don't think there's a whole lot of value there. But if you look at how he's been playing recently, which, again, teams should be doing, obviously, they should be scouting things like that right now. I think he's certainly a guy who could help a playoff team as a depth player. But, how many teams are going to see that? How many teams are going to feel that, that's exactly kind of what they need? And, there's other guys from other teams that will be on the market too. So it's really hard to gauge. But he's certainly someone that, even if you're offered, a mid to late round pick for him, it might be worth hanging on to him just given how good of a fit he's been, and just see if you can re-sign him.
That's what I was going to say. I think unless you're offered something pretty good for him, I would go ahead and keep him and try to re-sign him. I don't think his value is going to be that of a Calle Yarncrocs. And I don't think that the contract you're looking at giving him at the end of the year is going to be that of a Calle Yarncrocs either. So I think it's probably a gamble worth, doing to hold on to him through the deadline. Now, if someone wants to give you a second round pick for Colin Blackwell, I think you probably go for that.
Take that any day. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's going to be on the table. So just wanted to kind of do those real quick because we had talked about Calle, and I just think that was important in case anybody had any questions about anyone else. Those are our thoughts on them. All right, free agency. We have seen free agency go so sideways so fast for so many franchises, RJ. It is really, really scary. It is a very hard thing to get right because oftentimes, I mean, the way all the CBAs are structured is that team control lasts for a very, very long time. Essentially all of the prime years of a player, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3. It's very much set up in favor of teams, who draft somebody or acquire somebody when they're young. I understand why they did that, the CBA, right? Owners don't want to draft somebody and then immediately lose them to a richer franchise in the NHL. That is certainly something that, could easily happen given the financials of some teams versus others. But at the same time, it does mean that come free agency time, you're looking at guys that, at the absolute youngest are 27, and then you start looking at any sort of long-term deal and like, oh, the next thing you know, this contract's taking them till they're, 34, 35, and you don't know what that return is going to be on that back end after you've now given them a ton of money. That's the big worry anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, free agency, wrought with with examples of what not to do and paying for past performance and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about some of those things, some of the things you and I have seen go wrong, and what we want the Kraken to kind of avoid when it comes to free agency first. Just stuff that should be a non-starter. The first thing for me that should be a non-starter is if the player's age starts with a 3, don't sign him to anything longer than a 3-year deal. Like that should be the absolute max. And that should be if it's a young 30.
Right. It's pretty much a hard and fast rule. If the age starts with a 3, you got to be extra careful. I mean, there are some very, very rare exceptions to that, like a Joe Pavelski a few years ago, who somehow has been worth that contract. But those guys are very few and far between.
Yes. And the kind of examples I would cite as guys that are, the poster children, if 30-year-olds can be called children, for this would be the Brad Richards deal with the Rangers. And this was a guy who had been a number 1 center for a very long time, rock solid, but you know what? Just into his 30s, all of a sudden, 12 years of playing NHL hockey catches up to you. And there's not much that you can do at that point, and the productivity just falls off a cliff, and you're stuck, trying to deal with, in that case, they were scratching him. He was like one of their highest paid players, and he was literally a healthy scratch for them through some of that contract. The other one is everybody's favorite, Louis Erickson. Right?
Yep.
Signs that big deal with Vancouver, 6-year deal. That offseason, he turned 31 in there. Immediately falls from a 30-goal scorer to an 11-goal scorer, and he has not scored more than 11 goals in a season since. And that was a very, very heavy contract. 6 years, $36 million. That's a ton of money to be paying for 11 goals.
Yeah, for sure. And, the Canucks were paying for that for a long time. It hindered a lot of what they were able to do, from a team construction standpoint.
Yeah, and so there's plenty of examples of players like that. So I just think if they're already into their 30s, I don't care what they've done up until that point. It's not going to continue for that much longer. Just because historically speaking, like you said, Pavelski may be an exception. True superstars, right? Sidney Crosby, he's still doing all right. He's 34 now, but odds are anybody you're looking at in free agency is not going to be one of those guys. You know what I mean? And so
yeah,
I just want that out there. I think that's the first and biggest rule for the Kraken when you start looking at free agency.
And with that, I think it's important to also mention aging curves just in general. That's something you can look up. There's a lot of good research done as far as in general how NHL players age, and what's called an aging curve, where you'll get kind of average performance based on age, and you can see that generally in a player's prime years are in the 22, 23, 24 year old range, and when you hit 30 or so, and particularly certain types of players, like say a scoring winger. Scoring wingers really tend to drop off around 30, 31. And that's something that, happens pretty, reliably on, in the aggregate level. And you can pretty much count on that. And that's one of the reasons that free agency, is kind of so dangerous.
Agreed. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about, because that gets us out of the way of the 30-year-olds, but there's going to be some guys more so in their prime, a couple years shy of 30, because there always is every year. This year, Forsberg and Johnny Gadreau come to mind, and we'll get to them a little bit later. This is where one of the changes to one of the more recent CBAs, assuming it's still there, I did my best to confirm it before, but good God, it seems like these things change yearly, is the 7-year maximum term that you can sign a free agent from another team to. And this is something built in to, cut down on cap circumvention, where they were just tacking on all these years of players into their 40s so that they could lower the cap hit and all that shady stuff that Lou Lamoriello invented. So it does help limit things, because it means now if you sign a 27-year-old or a 28-year-old, you're only looking at 35. So maybe you only have 2 or 3 years at the back end of that deal where they're really not kind of worth the money you're giving them, that free agency premium that you're paying them. And to give an example of why that can be an okay thing, actually, is I'm going to use Zac Parise and Ryan Suter. Okay, so they both signed with the Minnesota Wild in 2012. It was a huge deal free agency-wise. I remember that whole, where are they going? They kind of wanted to play together. They both end up going to Minnesota. Both, I believe, kind of 27, 28, right in there. We talked about this on the Red Glare podcast, so those of you that listen to that know kind of where I'm going. They signed matching 13-year, $99 million deals. Okay? Everybody kind of knew 13-year deal for someone who's even 27, right? You're taking them to 40. Yeah, you're probably not seeing good value return those last, 5 years of that contract, really, at all. But what I do want to do is I want to highlight the first 7 years of their contracts in Minnesota. Now, we talked about Ryan Suter on the Red Glare podcast. He was a great, steady defenseman for the Minnesota Wild up until the point where they bought him out, which they bought him out, both of them, after 9 seasons. So 9 years into their 13-year things. Minute muncher, just solid. You can count on him. He was always going to take care of you. The first 7 years, I think, worth it for Ryan Suter. You got that kind of number one-ish defenseman you were looking for. The question for me was Zac Parise, because I was like, wow, that contract aged terribly for him. They obviously had to do the buyout. It's because he did the winger thing, and we'll talk about this with your contract example we could talk about next, of wingers are a little bit more dependent on the players around them. It's a little harder for them to just be the offensive, kind of creator and stuff in an offense. But when looking at the first 7 years of Zac Parise's time in Minnesota, really wasn't that bad. You'd be talking about the end of his contract at the age of 34. In 74 games, he scored 28 goals and 61 points. That is really not bad for a 34-year-old, if you're talking about that being the last year of a contract, or the second to the last year of a big free agent contract. Overall, he played 444 games in that time, scoring 167 goals and 336 points. So I think that to me proves I would not be scared if the Kraken signed a Forsberg or a Gadreau to a 7-year kind of max deal, just because I think that for some of these guys, and again, I'm talking about a winger here, it can age okay.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And I guess that kind of, transitions into my next point, where beware of the middle class. Mm-hmm. That's the issue. You have to make sure that player that you're paying over that kind of term is a, elite player, essentially. You have to make sure that is, a true number one. If it's a winger, a true number one winger. rather than someone who's maybe a second line kind of guy, or this middle class of forwards. And that's where we see a lot of problems pop up. You mentioned Louis Erickson already. That's an example of a winger who, while he's was a very good player, 30 goal scorer, he was never kind of an elite, first line winger type of guy. And when you have guys that are signed, to big money and big term like that, Milan Lucic was another. There were so many examples from that year. Andrew Ladd, Kyle Okposo, that year really, provided the example for what not to do of these guys who were, not at that elite level, but still got money and term. That's where you run into problems, I think. And teams are still doing it too. It's not like they've learned their lesson. I mean, we look at the Zach Hyman contract from this past year. While it's too early to see how that's going to age exactly, I think, we can all kind of see it. It might not age all that well, given that you have a winger that plays that style of game. Definitely not an elite guy. But that's really the point with free agency, where, you get a lot of really bad deals paying for bad performance, and overall, it's just this minefield of mistakes. But the exceptions are those players who are good enough, who are truly superstar players that are worth that money. And if you can get them at that 27, 28-year-old age range, they can work out for you.
I totally agree. And I think, some teams have kind of flirted with this idea. And I know it's something that the Players Union was very worried about kind of during the last CBA talks, which was, okay, there's going to be kind of two distinct classes of players, and that middle class isn't going to exist anymore, where it's going to be the superstars are going to make their money that they deserve and all that stuff because they're the best players. And then teams are just going to round out the teams around them with cheap, either entry-level contracts or depth players on cheaper deals. And they were going to try to kind of squeeze out that middle class, because those were the contracts that were weighing down teams too much. Right, it is okay in a world of, let's see, what's the cap at right now, 81.5. It's okay when you have $81.5 million in cap space to pay your number one center $11 million. It's okay, because if he's a true number one center, he's probably worth more to you. But that's kind of more so where the market is. That's totally fine. But what you can't do is load him up with two $6 million wingers on his wing that are going to max out at 25 goals. Right? Yep. Because now you've got 12 million on guys that are, they're okay, but you could probably stick some entry-level guys on this true number one center's wing, and they're going to score 20 goals. So, you know what I mean? Is it worth paying an extra maybe $8 million combined for those 10 extra goals a season? Probably not. That's not good value. And we've seen teams really get burned by that. A lot of the teams that have tried to build their way through free agency, that's where they get burned, because they enter off seasons with, a lot of cap space, $20 million in cap space, and they feel this need to spend it all, but there's not always that many players that are worth it. And so that's the one thing I'm worried about with the Kraken, is that they're going to enter this offseason potentially, upwards of 15 million even, depending on how things shake out. In cap space, you don't have to spend it all. It's okay to leave some of that on the table if the contracts just don't make sense.
Right. And the cap space, it goes quickly too. You talk about the amount they have. That's really, signing two, kind of premier free agents. I went using Cap Friendly's Armchair GM tool the other day, signed all the RFAs like McCann and such that they're going to re-sign, anyway. And I went and signed, just for example, like Philip Forsberg to a contract at just under 9 mil AAV. And I signed another guy who's kind of been rumored, on 32 Thoughts. Elliot Friedman thought he might be a good fit for the Kraken. John Klingberg, signed him for maybe the 8 million AAV that he's looking at. And all of a sudden, the Kraken are $4 million over the cap.
Yep.
So that money goes very quickly. And, they could move a few guys to make that work. But still, I mean, that it's not a lot. It's always less than it looks like. Certainly when you start getting into paying big free agent prices.
Yeah. So in my opinion, they probably only have the ability to truly go after one whale. And that's kind of going to be it. And, I don't know that that's going to be the case given some of the, contracts we've already seen Ron Francis sign in free agency, right? They were the three big ones when he made that big splash. And, obviously we could talk about Grubauer. I don't think 5.9 for a goalie is necessarily too much. For a goaltender with a long proven track record the way he had. Obviously, things have not worked out that great. You could also argue that it was a little bit too much term for a 30-year-old. I would totally, cede that part of an argument to you, but the money wasn't ridiculous to me. But then you start looking, the Jaden Schwartz contract. Jaden Schwartz, 28, 29. You're signing him to term 5.5 a year, 5.5 a year. Again, that's that mid-level contract for, again, a mid-level guy who had an extensive injury history previously, mind you. And we saw that kind of play out this year too. I don't know. That one was an interesting one. And then the Wenberg contract, which might be the worst looking one of all right now. At the time, it seemed great because you're signing him at 27 with only 3 years term. Like you're out when he's 30. Like that's all the stuff we were just talking about. That's a dream. The fact that a GM was able to pull that contract off. You know what I mean? Wenberg probably get a new agent. But he just hasn't played out or worked out at all. I know there was hopes that he could slide into the top 6 center role. That hasn't been the case. I mean, he's looked rough, centering the fourth line right now. So I don't say this to be negative. I'm really not trying to be negative, but already given the free agent choices that Ron Francis has made with the Kraken, I am dubious about what kinds of decisions are going to be made this upcoming offseason.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I was thinking as he was saying that too, talking about using this last offseason as an example for what they want to do again. We want to do the same things. We want to be aggressive again. When you look at those 3 free agent signings, and those, you could argue, are probably the 3 biggest mistakes that they made in this past offseason. And again, you hate to talk that way about, players that are still on the team. I think, what I think about paying goalies and Grubauer. I'm even willing to kind of, throw that one out there because I think goalies are always just a separate category, free agent otherwise. But you look at Schwartz and you look at Wenberg, and those are 2 contracts that are very firmly in those middle class of players that, you have to be wary of. And I think both of those have been good examples of why you should be wary of those contracts. Jaden Schwartz, you look at the term left. He's got 4 more years after this one, for a player who's generally pretty injury prone. And if you look at aging curves, should be on the decline, now, if not soon. And then, Wenberg, that's, even though he's 27, you're getting those prime years. When you're talking about a free agent who's 27, even on the younger end, he's someone that I think the Kraken were hoping would step up to play a bigger role than he had in the past. Someone that would develop, into a top 6 forward, as Ron Francis said at the start of the season. And generally, when a player's 27, that's what they are. You're generally not going to get a whole lot more development from that point on. It can happen sometimes, but it's very, very rare, and you certainly can't count on it.
For sure. You can't, and I'm just going to kind of just to put it in perspective for everybody real quick as I pull up all the pages that I need. The combined cap hits of Wenberg and Jaden Schwartz, assuming I'm doing the math right, which is a big assumption, $10 million every year.
Yep.
Because it's 4.5 plus 5.5. All right, I'm off to a good start then.
Correct.
For that $10 million against the cap that you're paying this year, you have so far received 11 goals from them combined and 44 points. Okay? Now, would you rather pay both of them for that production, or would you rather pay $10 million per year, which would be maybe a little bit of an overpayment, for Philip Forsberg, who has 27 goals and 46 points all by himself right now, and who could really have stepped up in some key moments when the Kraken would have needed him, and played well on the power play probably, and all that kind of stuff, and just provide star power, which is an important aspect of it all. I mean, that helps put butts in seats. I do think it makes a difference. I think it makes a difference on the ice for some guys too, when they feel like they're playing with somebody who has that ability. I think that can help, kind of raise the ability of everyone around them. So that's just kind of an example of, these mid-tier contracts, they can add up quick, like you said, and they can add up to essentially just equal a superstar, but when you split that production amongst multiple people, I mean, you could be paying somebody very little to be getting the 6 goals that you've gotten out of Jared McCann, or the 5 goals you've gotten out of Wenberg.
Exactly. Jaden Schwartz, yeah.
Jaden, that's what I meant. Thank you.
But yeah, no, exactly. I mean, you could easily do that. And, you talk about it's split over two players. Okay, you talk about a Forsberg and then, add someone for near league minimum salary. And we look at the players the Kraken were able to get late in free agency, that essentially no one wanted. Ryan Donato, Marcus Johansen. Those are the guys, that you're adding one of in addition to the superstar, and they can contribute for you as well. And oftentimes do almost as good.
Yeah, Johansen, 6 goals, 20 points, right in there with those guys. For
Yep.
a lot less and no term.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of an example there. All right, let's look ahead to this year's free agent class then, RJ. I just talked about him, Philip Forsberg. I think he's probably the biggest get in this free agent class, in my opinion.
I would agree.
Okay. I think number 2's got to be Johnny Gadreau. Again, he's somebody who is going to put up, a substantial amount of numbers, going to help out on your power play, like kind of just be that superstar go-to guy that the Kraken clearly need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those are, when you talk about scoring wingers, because that's probably the Kraken's number one thing that they're missing this season, are finishers, scoring wingers. You've got that really good pair in Forsberg and Gadreau, and there's really no one else. It's a big drop off. Kind of before you get to number 3, really. And yeah, those are the two guys. They play a little different style wise, stylistically there's some differences there. You could argue which one would be a better fit for the Kraken. I don't know, Dylan, I mean, you're kind of the X's and O's guys. Do you have an idea there?
Well, in some ways, I want to say Johnny Gadreau just because I love what he can do to create offense. We've seen him do it against the Kraken, the way he just finds little pockets to set himself up in, the way he can, dish it as well as just, score himself. But realistically, I don't know who he'd play well with on this Kraken team. Like, I don't think him and Jared McCann would really be a good pairing. I think McCann would work a lot better with a fellow shooter in Philip Forsberg. Just two guys that they just want to skate into the zone and launch it. And I feel like that's something that would work out better for the Kraken given who they have. I just don't know that the creativity side of things has played out very well for the Kraken this year. So I don't know that Gadreau is really the direction you want to go there.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably, I think you're right on that. I tend to defer to your judgment on these things anyway, but that's kind of what I was thinking, in the first place, and for these two guys though, I keep having the question in my mind of, are these two truly at that elite level? Are they unquestionably good enough that they can kind of poke their heads above that middle class and be the superstars that you're going to need them to be if you sign them to a contract like this? Because I know there have been players in the past that teams have thought, we're above that level, that we're at the superstar level, you can afford to pay them, and then they just weren't that.
Right. Yeah, no, there's for sure been guys like that. In my opinion, most of those guys tend to be the David Clarksons of the world, right? They tend to be more of the power forward where you're paying to try to bring in, you're paying not so much because of the, productivity that they've had in the past as much as the body that they bring and maybe the skill set that they bring, because you're paying for leadership and grit and toughness, the Lucic's, right? Don't ever, that should be rule number 3. Don't ever pay somebody because of how big they are or what they can bring from a gritty perspective. Because unless it's gritty, it's not going to pay off for you. Gritty, I think you could probably make your money back if you were to somehow acquire him, just in merchandising. But those never work out. If you're paying somebody because they're a 30-goal scorer, those tend to work out because they can, if they've got a long track record of being a 30-goal scorer. Philip Forsberg, the last couple times he's played full seasons, 30-goal scorer, been well on 30-goal pace in the seasons in which he's been injured. He clearly is just a 30-goal scorer in the NHL. That's just who he is. He's going to be that. And he's probably, looking at some of the other examples like Parise that we talked about earlier, that's not going to disappear overnight when he turns 30 in 3 years. So I think Forsberg, you're safe. Johnny Gadreau, again, you're safe. He's just smart. He's so smart about how he plays. He's going to be one of these guys that, yes, he's not the biggest guy out there. And sure, when his speed drops off, he's going to have to adjust how he plays the game. But we've seen other smart guys that, even if they weren't reliant on speed, when they slow down, they're so smart they can adjust and make those adjustments and just take advantage of other players because they just know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Any young guy they're going up against cannot match their ability to just outthink them. And I think Gadreau's going to be one of those guys where he's going to be productive. He might not be a 25-plus goal scorer towards the end of a 7-year contract if you were to sign him to one, but my guess is he's going to be a lock for 50 assists really for the next 7 years or so.
And the ups and downs with Gadreau don't concern you as far as, because you look at the last 2 seasons before this one, he kind of fell well below the point per game pace. I think the team around him just wasn't doing as well. Obviously the Flames weren't in the best position, but are the Kraken really in the best position right now? That's just one worry that I have.
That is a worry. I think that's an appropriate question to be asking. It doesn't worry me because I think of the positions that, yes, those Flames teams they were terrible. Obviously, everybody really suffered and fell off a cliff there. It wasn't just him. All of their good players really did. So I'm not as worried. I understand the concerns given the Kraken situation for sure. But even still, I mean, you're talking about 60 points in 58 points in 70 games 1 year and 49 points in 56 games last year. That'd still make him the best player on this Kraken team.
That's
easy.
That's true.
So
yeah, and it's not so much again right away. It's that you're worried about. I think certainly he can continue to be that player. But yeah, as you said, these guys probably will age okay.
Yeah, you never know, and injuries can come in. Like I said, Philip Forsberg has not played a full season in a hot minute. Like, that is something to consider. Mm-hmm. We saw that with Jaden Schwartz. Injury histories are something. So, it is something to look at. But I think those are the 2 big names. I'd love for the Kraken to get one of them. That'd be really nice. That being said, it's kind of a shallow free agency class. These guys are going to get bid up. I don't want them to, pay $12 million for either one of them. That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, talking about, numbers, how high would you be willing to go? You're in Ron Francis's chair. There's other teams bidding. How high do you go on either of these 2 guys?
I think I go up to 10 for Forsberg. I really try not to, but I think it's that important to bring someone in. One of the things we didn't really talk about, and part of the reason we were both speculating that Ron Francis did, speak with the media, was because of the Seattle Times article written about how, the team has underperformed and could they be losing the city of Seattle and stuff. And one of the things that was brought up was season ticket holders had to buy season tickets for the first 3 seasons. Right? It's not like, at least. So it's not just like season ticket holders had to eat it this year while the team was bad. Like, they really need to turn this thing around. And like I said, one of the best ways to turn things around is to bring in a legitimate superstar, a pull you out of your seat kind of player. And we've seen that in these games against Nashville. Philip Forsberg can be that. So I think if I'm in Ron Francis's shoes, I'm thinking about that. I'm consciously aware of that fact. And so that's why I would go up to 10 for Forsberg. It might not be the best, on paper hockey decision, but I think that, it isn't ever just about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It never is just about that. And I think you bring up something very important to talk about that we probably should have talked about earlier. But the context behind, this whole media availability. And it was something that was, kind of a surprise to us. I do wonder how long it had been, planned in advance. My guess is not very long. But that Seattle Times article came out basically about how the Kraken are at risk of kind of losing the city, and if they don't turn it around quickly. And we've talked about that question quite a bit on the various post games podcasts that we've done, and it's certainly something that's on the minds of some people. And while Francis or an ownership would never admit it, that's just not something you ever talk about. I think there really is some pressure on Francis from ownership to turn this thing around quickly. And he was certainly talking like a guy who, one, felt the pressure, knew that his mandate was you need to go out and compete next year. Like he had been told that, it seemed like. And, 2, that, that he was trying to get that message out there and get it out there right now and right away so that fans know, look, we're going to be competitive next season. He said a lot of things that, reading between the lines, it felt like, okay, write this, media, write this down. Let people know we're going to go compete right away. We're going to be aggressive in free agency. Let the people know that they need to stay tuned for next season. So I think that's definitely the position that Francis is working from.
Yeah, so because of that, I think I go up to 10 for Forsberg. Gadreau maybe 8.5, maybe 9 if that's absolutely what it took, but I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean Forsberg, the number I was thinking, and this is in the whole Ron Francis desperation thing, would be 9.5.
Hmm.
I look at some of the, I think that's what Kucherov got. I know it's what Mark Stone got.
Hmm.
And while I don't think that Forsberg is at that level, he's a UFA. Those are the prices you have to pay. And I don't know, some team might go 10.
Yeah.
I do think, there's probably might be teams out there that'll go 10 on him. I think the Predators, will go, they might offer 9. I think they want
Hmm.
to pay him less than Yossi from what I'm hearing. But, that's probably what it would take for him to stay in Nashville. Gaudreau, I would not like to go over 9.
Hmm.
It's tough because, if I'm a GM who just has total freedom to run things my way, I'm not signing either of these two guys. I'm just not going to do it. I mean, unless it's, you're talking in the 8s. And
Hmm.
then you can go, okay, that's a good deal for me. But, with free agent prices, I'm generally, for a winger, hesitant to ever go there.
Hmm.
But in Ron Francis's shoes, trying to save my job, yeah, I'd probably go 9 for Gaudreau, 9.5 for Forsberg.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. So let's kind of quickly, because we're going a little over the hour mark already, but I think that it's important. Let's go ahead and just touch on some other names, real quick. How you feeling about Hurdle?
You know that I love Tomas Hurdle,
Hmm.
absolutely love Tomas Hurdle, and I would, I would put aside, whatever the numbers or any of that thing to see him in Seattle just from how much I would enjoy covering him day to day on the team. He's a fantastic player. He can play center, which is huge. He is a center. I don't think he necessarily fits what the Kraken need. Because they're going to have plenty of centers. We talked
Hmm.
about this already. They're going to be so deep down the middle. I mean, Hurdle can play wing for you. That's certainly something he can do. But I just don't know that he's the best fit. The one thing, I don't know, the one potential thing is maybe having played in San Jose this whole time and on a bad Sharks team recently, he'll be, undervalued perhaps by the rest of the league, fly under the radar a little bit. Certainly, I mean, for the same money, if you
Yeah.
get him cheaper than a Forsberg or Gaudreau, I think, yeah, I think he could be a really good bargain signing. I mean, certainly, if you could get him at less than 8.5.
Right. Well, that's what I wanted to bring up was in 55 games this year, he's got 22 goals and 42 points. That's pretty close to the two guys that we were just talking about, but Hurdle is going to command a much lesser price despite being a center, which normally
Yep.
that would mean a lot, but you just know. The thing that I was going to mention from him is yeah, just his personality, always happy, all that stuff, and I think that would be important to add to this Kraken team coming off of, a disappointing season. I think he'd be good for the culture in the Kraken locker room and stuff. And like I said, you're talking about very similar production to those two other guys that we said, would be worth a lot. So had to mention him. You mentioned Klingberg, which I think is a very interesting one because I just don't know that I want to see the Kraken invest that much on defensemen this offseason, considering how many they've had all year long.
Agreed. I really would prefer to see them spend that money elsewhere. Klingberg, while he could be a good fit systematically, Jack
Mm-hmm.
Hahn on Twitter, did a really good breakdown, kind of why Klingberg has fallen off in Dallas the last couple of years and how
Mm-hmm.
systems has a lot to do with it. I think he would be a good fit in Seattle, but when you talk about the aging curves, when you talk about where you're going to spend your money, I just don't think that. That's where you want to put that money because he's going to command, I think, $8 million plus, given what the free agent D market is. You look at these top guys, there's not a whole lot out there.
No.
I think Chris Letang's probably staying in Pittsburgh. He's not going anywhere, and then Klingberg's probably going to be the top UFA defenseman. Maybe a Hampus Lindholm, but it's tough. These guys are going to probably get overpaid.
Mm-hmm.
He's 29. You're talking about, if
Yeah.
he gets that 7-year deal, you're talking about definitely having some years at the end of that you're going to be regretting at the time. So I would prefer that they not go there.
I agree. I think, you'd probably help the power play, but I don't know that the price would be worth it given how much he'd help the power play. I think they need to really focus on forwards. Hampus Lindholm was going to be the other guy I mentioned. He's Adam Larson, guys. He might be actually Adam Larson, but a little bit better, realistically. So that would be my comp for Hampus Lindholm. I'd love to see him with the Kraken, but again, I don't know that it makes sense. I don't know that they need him really, because they have enough defensemen already on the roster. They're all pretty reasonably priced. You're not spending a ton on this blue line, and I feel like a lot of their problems this year are very fixable. A lot of it can be changed with some coaching and just, getting them to not make basic mistakes.
Exactly.
So
we talked about this so many times. It's not skill deficiency. It's just simple things, very coachable things. So that's the issue, really. I think they've got all the skill that they need on the blue line.
Yeah. Now, one last name I'm going to mention here, RJ, because I'm on Spot Rack looking at the unrestricted free agents. How about a Claude Julian?
As a coach?
He's just on here under the UFAs. 62 years old, player position listed as coach, but just kind of got to mention that because I see that name there. But yeah, so many of the other top free agent guys are centers that I would talk about. I think there's some really good ones, some underrated guys, but I don't know that it works for the Kraken. I think we could probably wait and do a deeper dive into really everybody in free agency, where we can kind of get into, the Max Domi's, Nino Niederreiter kind of, peoples of the world. But we won't do that here because this was more so just about the general overview for what we, should expect and maybe want heading into this first off season of the build. Now that we know it's going to include being aggressive in free agency.
Yep.
So
the quick build.
Yep. The quick build. All right. So that's going to do it for this podcast. I guess the one other thing Kraken news wise we didn't talk about was Mark Giordano, 1,000 games played last night for us. That's really awesome. It's going to be cool that, about 50 of those are going to be with the Seattle Kraken.
And that he gets reaches that milestone with the Kraken.
Yeah.
Cool to have someone past that threshold, with the team, making some history already. And, good for Gio. Undrafted guy coming into the league. Huge accomplishment for him.
Yeah, if anybody saw that graphic, that awesome graphic Root had put up at the beginning of that game to show how rare it is for, just people in general to get to 1,000 games, how few defensemen get to 1,000 games, and then when you start factoring in the fact that he was undrafted, it just becomes, incredible. 10th defenseman ever to be undrafted and get to 1,000 games. That is very elite company. Speaks a lot about the kind of guy he is, both on and off the ice, to be able to do that. So really happy for the captain. Just wanted to mention that real quick. And then that's going to be it for this episode of the Deep Dive. Hope everybody enjoyed it as always. We appreciate it, all the support from everybody listening to it. And we're going to see you all next time.